Mara Menzies.
And I'm John Mukeni Namai.
We are both storytellers from Kenya.
Together with the meteorologists, we travel to the climate front lines of northern Kenya to discover how people there are using indigenous knowledge to adapt to climate change. This podcast, Listening to the Rainmakers, shares what we learned on our journey.
Episode 6. The borders make us fragile.
Communities depend a lot on the water that comes from Uganda. This other side of the mountain, the leeward side, it doesn't rain as much.
The borders is such a huge issue, and this is just going back to the division of the African continent, particularly during the colonial times, and how that has created issues across the entire country. I see it at the Kenyan coast. I see it here. I see it in the center of Kenya, in Nanyuki, where there are hundreds of thousands of acres that are given over to conservancies that are fenced, and these were lands that people could use to graze their cattle, and have been used as that for centuries. And then suddenly somebody puts up a beacon, a boundary, and says you're not allowed to use this anymore. It is going to cause friction, and it's a friction that is not going to go away, which means that violence is never going to be far away whenever you're talking about land and conservancies and borders where previously there were none. So that's an issue that, as somebody who is Scottish and Kenyan, and I have a great love of this place, it's concerning in that sense, because as the climate changes, then clearly conflict is also going to stay here, because people will need to graze their cattle unless an alternative can be found.
We have seen our livestock move to Uganda in numbers, and they don't come back. Like right now, we have 70% of our animals in Uganda. So the 30% that's around, you can see if Uganda closes border right now, or we get that into trouble of some sort with Uganda, we left 70% of our livestock there stuck. So you can see with the climate change, our numbers have been increasing to Uganda, especially the livestock numbers, and they don't come back because the grasses don't regrow enough to support them. So we have been seeing animals going there, not coming back. But the good news is that we still see farmers going there to pick them for selling, so they are able to access them and use the money to buy food here.
I'm curious about the dowry system because the climate change is forcing people to take the cows and and livestock further and further away. But dowry plays a huge part in the culture here. So raids do happen because if you do want to get married, as many of the interviewees said, then you do need cows. That's what you need, and therefore raiding appears to be something that is going to continue. Regardless of whether climate change is happening or not, that's simply something that needs to happen. One of the businessmen today, he was the first person to bring up the idea of population growth, saying that perhaps the number of cows has stayed the same, but the number of people has increased so much that the ratio is now out of balance. So he was the only person to have brought up that particular issue, and that is, I think, something that does need to be considered as well, because if one of the main concerns is there is no food when the husbands go away, there's no grass to feed the livestock when they're here, there is no rain. All of these things obviously contribute to the man having to be away for longer, and for the animals to be away further, and for the woman to have to fend for herself and her children and by herself for longer periods of time.
A peace building officer we interviewed said to us, before the borders and boundaries were made, the people of this region were like one family. Now the lines on the land are making a difficult situation worse. We have heard from many people this deep worry. If the situation comes to a point where a community feels they are cursed, that the pastoralism that was given to them by God is now becoming impossibly difficult, they might be pushed to such an extent that only despair and frustration take over. Part of the solution must surely be to find ways to keep sharing knowledge between generations and different communities, and that's what we explore in the next episode.
Thanks to our project partners, Adverse Camber and ICPAC, and the project funders, the British Council.